This video is about a 7-day cruise I took with my brother to Tahiti and the surrounding islands at the end of February of 2019. We booked this cruise aboard the Sprit, which is one of the ships that are a part of the Windstar Cruise Lines. The Sprit is a large sailing yacht that holds a maximum of only 148 passengers. It uses 5 mainsails that produce between 12 and 20% of its propulsion depending upon prevailing winds. It can go 12 knots with sails and about 7 knots using engines alone. We had booked a berth amidship on the lowest level because we were told it would be the most stable in rough seas. The room was small but very efficient. The first trip from Papeete to Moorea got underway in the evening around 5 o'clock. The weather turned rainy and windy, with swells around 6 feet. As we got dressed for dinner, we looked out the portal to find the swells only inches below the portal. The experience was rather breathtaking, but rather than finding it disconcerting, we found it amazingly mesmerizing. Meals were served every day in either the dining room, which was always a more formal affair, or breakfast and lunch in the veranda room, where you could choose to eat either inside or out on the deck. My brother and I always chose to eat out on the deck and were frequently joined by fellow passengers we had gotten to know. The first morning on Moorea, we took a tender from the boat to the dock. The tenders run every 15 minutes. At the dock, we then took a taxi a couple of miles to town and rented a little 2-man Jeep so we could explore the island on our own. The first thing that struck me was how lush the islands are. They are tropical rainforest after all. The road around the island is narrow and the jungle comes right down to the road. For 90% of the island, there's almost no commercial or residential development on either side of the road. You feel like you're driving through a jungle until the road comes back out to the coastline. There you can occasionally see the over-the-water bungalows in the distance that are ubiquitous on many of the islands. But these bungalows are all associated with expensive resorts that disappear from view as you get closer. This type of accommodation can cost between $1,000 and $3,000 a night. Moorea has the greatest number of volcanic peaks of any of the Society Islands. One of the few roads that leads inland winds up the side of Mount Tuivia to the Belvedere Lookout. From there you have a spectacular view of Mount Rotui with Opunopu Bay on one side and Cook's Bay on the other. The next day we took a small boat out to a reef populated by numerous friendly sharks for our first snorkeling expedition. This gave me an opportunity to test my modified face mask I had fitted with a pair of old glasses. Although the mask worked well with the glasses, the buoyancy of the air in the mask prevented me from swimming much below the surface. So the GoPro camera mounted to the top of the face mask kept coming out of the water. Fortunately, I had brought a handheld camera stick, so we were still able to video our underwater adventures. But probably the biggest disappointment of the cruise was seeing all of the bleached coral that was caused by rising ocean temperatures. As a result, a lot of the video we took underwater at the various islands all looked the same. So rather than describe our snorkeling adventures by the islands we visited, I have condensed the more interesting water excursions in this segment. Swimming with all the friendly sharks was a lot of fun. Although these were not the 9-foot great white sharks you see in the movies, I wondered how docile they would be if someone cut themselves on the coral and started bleeding. But these sharks have grown to enjoy swimming with humans because humans feed them every day, and they have learned not to bite the hand that feeds them. Another interesting water excursion on Bora Bora was the Aqua Safari, which was diving with a helmet and an air hose like you see in the movies. It was nice to finally be diving in deeper water, but the dive was confined to an area of only about 30 square feet, which was about the length of the air hose. Also, there wasn't that much to see. There was some bleached coral around the perimeter, but nothing to see in the center. 5 divers would go down at about the same time, but there was nothing really to do except
marveled at a few fish, and this friendly stingray that seemed to have an affinity to the host. Fish food was attached to each diver's helmet to attract more fish, but then the host would photograph each diver, then try to sell them their photos for about $70 each before going home. The dive lasted about 20 minutes, but after about 10 it started to feel contrived. It would have been one thing if we had been dropped around an old sunken ship, but just walking around and staring at each other with nothing to do got kind of boring. Looking back on it, if I had to do it again, I think I would have booked the scuba diving excursions instead of the snorkeling or the Aqua safari.
The next island on the cruise after Moorea was Raiatea. It was the only other island besides Tahiti that had a port deep enough to allow the wind spirit to dock instead of anchor. We were greeted by a local shaman named Tehote, who later guided about 6 of us up the Wheroa River. This freshwater river was as lush and undeveloped as the Amazon and was surprisingly wide considering the size of the island. As the river narrowed, we got close enough to see the wild vanilla growing up the trees along the shoreline. Later that evening, aboard the chef put on an outdoor barbecue that was held on the rear deck. The buffet spared no expense, serving prime rib and lobster. They even went to the trouble of carving these amazing fruit sculptures just for effect. The next day we sailed to Motu Mahea, near the island of Teha. The word motu means a sandbar between an island and the open ocean. Around the French Polynesian islands there are quite a number of these motus. They range in size from about 1 acre to 100 acres and are almost all sand. The ship anchored near Teha and tendered everyone to the island. The motu had a small dock because the water near the beach is so shallow it prevents even small boats from getting close to the beach. The water around Motu Mahea is amazingly clear, and the beaches are mostly white sand. The vegetation is mostly coconut trees with very little underbrush, which makes them very picturesque. This island was the sort of quintessential South Pacific island you always see in promos. But unlike the promos, with white, flawless white sand beaches, most motus have some debris that falls from trees or washes up from the ocean. Without underbrush, though, the islands are easy to see through and walk through. The sand is pocketed with small holes made by sand crabs, which dart in and out as you walk through. Also, the shallow water does have sharp coral, so wet shoes are advised when walking around the island or in the water. The cruise rented the entire island for the day and treated the passengers to a fabulous barbecue lunch and time to just hang out in chaise lounges or to swim and snorkel. The palm trees provided just enough protection from the sun to make hanging out very enjoyable. Nets were also hung to prevent the coconuts from falling on people's heads. After a relaxing day on Motu Mahea, the ship raised anchor and we set sail for Bora Bora. As I had covered in an earlier segment, the first day my brother and I did the helmet dive and more snorkeling. But the second day we rented a small car and drove around the island. The topography was similar to Moorea, but was a little more developed. About 50% of the island had homes along the road, but there were still sections that were undeveloped. You could always tell when you would go past the resort because they were hidden behind rock walls. Bora Bora is an island in the middle of a lagoon surrounded by an island ring. Looking out over the water, you could see the island ring in the distance. The water is light in color because as a lagoon, the water remains shallow out to the island ring. We had rented the car for 4 hours, but it took less than 3 hours to drive around the island, so we stopped for lunch at a popular restaurant called the Bloody Mary. This was mentioned frequently by fellow passengers who had eaten there and recommended it. It had a marvelous ambiance. The entire floor was soft white sand with very high ceilings, so the atmosphere was very Polynesian, very open and airy. The food was very good and not overpriced. The last island on the cruise was Huahine, which is actually two islands connected by a small bridge. My brother and I decided to take a taxi instead of renting a car so that we would have the benefit of a guide. Our guide took us to all the most significant destinations: a black pearl farm, a vanilla plantation, the Sacred Site Museum, and walked amongst the large blue-eyed eels. We were told that Huahine is the island where the locals from the other islands go to vacation, partly because it is less developed. But looking on a map, it seems it has more commercial development than the other islands except for Tahiti. It even has a large airport that can handle commercial jet traffic. But taking the road that runs around the island, you don't see any of that. It does look lush and fairly pristine. That evening, the cruise line rented another motu and put on a fabulous luau. After dinner, we watched a breathtaking tropical sunset, and after the sun went down, we were treated to some of the local talent, which included Polynesian belly dancing and an impressive and extensive display of fire dancing. On the return trip to the ship, it was touching they lit up the Wind Spirit like a Christmas tree for the last night of our cruise. I just wanted to give Windstar an additional shout out for the accommodations to and from the ship. From the airport, we were transported and booked into the Intercontinental Hotel for the evening. The hotel had beautiful grounds, and the complimentary breakfast buffet included anything you could possibly want. The cruise line also included all the transfers to and from the ship, the hotels, and the airport. On the last day after leaving the ship, we were transported to the Manava Suite Resort, where we had the use of a half-day room because the flight back to Los Angeles left that evening at 10 o'clock. This allowed us the use of a room, the pool, and their Wi-Fi connection until we had to leave for the airport. With a bar, a beach, an infinity pool, and a place to shower and change, we ended our Tahiti cruise very well rested.